Well, I don't think reconciliation is directly related to economic growth per se, but I believe that reconciliation is necessary if we want to basically have societies which live in peace, like internally, but also with other societies, and this will encourage cultural change, this will encourage youth to change, and circumstantially then will result in stronger economic growth. Yeah, well, in each Western Balkan country there exists a specific narrative which is based on the nationalism of this particular country, where basically our side is always the innocent side, it's always the victim, the other side is always the aggressor, the occupier, and always if there is a territory in question which is disputable, it is always our holy land and the other side is the usurper, and etc. And with this kind of mythical narratives which are prevalent in Western Balkan societies, it is very hard to reach reconciliation. It is really hard to even have discussions between people, especially young people, about these topics if they don't really have access to information which do not fit in this particular narrative. So I think a lot of effort needs to be put that people have access to different information which may not necessarily fit in this nationalist narrative, and allow the people to make their own conclusions. And we are lacking this at the moment. Well, if you look at the Belgrade-Prishtina dialogue in the last 8 years since its inception, you see lots of agreements were made, lots of progress was made in certain areas, but the narrative surrounding the dialogue hasn't really changed. You would still get the impression that it's two enemies basically having battle rounds when they negotiate, where one side wins, the side loses. Not much has changed since, I don't know, let's say 2008 when it comes to the narrative around the dialogue. And now we see that the prevalence of this narrative, it's what also hindering the normalization process itself, because it's very hard to present your citizens with any kind of resolution which consists of major concessions to the other side. If you have a narrative that there will never be concessions and that, this is a battle, we just have to win, and it will be very hard to imagine us coming to any kind of a successful agreement if this narrative remains prevalent, and if basically any agreement is made without the change of approach and the change of how the entire process is presented to the citizens. That is, the process is supposed to result in reconciliation, in peace, and in long-term stability and coexistence of different societies and ethnic groups. If we present it as such, then we have a chance of making a sustainable agreement. If we don't present it as such, we have a really hard time making the agreement reached actually sustainable in the long term. Well, I completely agree that it is a major issue, that if North Macedonia, after everything that has been done in the past 2 years to make, EU accession of Macedonia a lot more realistic, and primarily I mean the Prespa agreement with Greece and its implementation, if Macedonia after all of this would be denied opening accession negotiations, that will not only be a blow for North Macedonia, that will also be a blow for EU prospects of every single Western Balkan country, because if doing everything, doing all the homework, doing everything is supposed to be done is not enough to actually have opening of negotiations, then it basically EU loses attractiveness it maybe had in the past, and then there's a question: why would any Western Balkan country make any painful concessions and undergo some painful and demanding reforms if this kind of EU prospect is dark anyway? So this is why I'm really hopeful that come June, the European Council will vote for open negotiations with North Macedonia. That will not only be beneficial for this country in particular, but for the EU prospects of the entire region, and may help basically giving incentive to other countries to follow North Macedonia's path, because then there will be some promise of EU integration which would otherwise be absent.